Good afternoon, Church here. Today I'm going to show you how to do a weight and balance utilizing the owner's manual for your Cessna 172. Just to set the stage, this is just a very brief overview of how to do this. It's nothing too extensive. If you're wanting additional information or if you have questions, I strongly encourage you to check out the FAA Handbook 1 that covers weight and balance in depth. But in this video, I'm going to keep it very brief, very surface level, just to give you an idea of what you need to do prior to every flight and especially on your check ride. You as the PIC are responsible for all things weight and balance, meaning that you are not to exceed any limits and you're not to put the aircraft into a dangerous position by not having the weight distributed properly. So before we get into this, just a quick overview of what weight and balance is. We're going to start with weights. So there are several different types of weights for larger and more complex aircraft, such as ramp weight and all-up weight. The only three weights that I want you to be concerned with for our purposes are basic empty weight, max gross weight, and usable load. The FAA's definition of basic empty weight is standard empty weight plus optional equipment. And the definition of empty weight is the weight of the airframe, engines, all permanently installed equipment, and the unusable fuel. And it also says here, depending on which part of the federal regulations you're going under, it may or may not include the oil, which for this particular aircraft does not include the oil. Now, as you probably know, we can't lift an infinite amount of weight with our aircraft. So what we do is we have a maximum allowable gross weight, also known as max gross weight. That is the aircraft plus whatever you put inside of it at its maximum, what it's capable of flying with. Now, the difference between the max gross weight and the basic empty weight gives you what's called the usable load. The usable load for Cessna 172s is usually around 900 pounds. So the question is, if I have 900 pounds of useful load, does that mean that I can put my 215-pound self in the pilot seat and then stash 600 pounds of bowling balls in the tail section? No, it does not. Because that weight distribution throws off the second half of this equation, balance. So what is balance? Balance is exactly what it seems. It is the balancing point on the aircraft for the load. So if you were to get a fulcrum and then set your aircraft right on the CG, it should balance perfectly between the nose and the tail. So the question is, where is the center of gravity in this plane? That is determined by the number of inches from the datum point. The datum is a point of reference for every aircraft dictated by the manufacturer, and it's just a point on the aircraft that can be measured in inches to give you different positions along the aircraft where you can store stuff. So some manufacturers start with the very tip of the aircraft. They'll set their datum here. Some start at the beginning of the engine. Cessna decided to set their datum right in front of the firewall. And the firewall is right here. It's right where the engine compartment starts. You don't have to get too into detail with knowing exactly where the datum is. It's just an arbitrary point that gives you an idea for inches for each station. Now, let's get into the actual math of this thing. For our purposes today, and once again, this kind of goes into keeping your electronic flight bag organized. I strongly encourage you to have each aircraft broken down by tail number. And within these folders, I recommend you have the weight and balance form and also the owner's manual. And I'm going to break both of these down for you. I'll start with the weight and balance. So, all weight and balance forms are specific to that aircraft. As you can see here, we have our make, Cessna, model 172 Mike, our serial number, and the registration number, also known as the tail number. On here, it gives us our weight, our arm, and our moment. And I'm going to explain, the weight is very straightforward. The weight down here, this is what our aircraft empty weight is. The arm, also known as inches from the datum, is giving us exactly how many inches back from the firewall is our center of gravity. So if you were to get our aircraft and then measure 36 inches from the firewall, that would give you your balancing point. Okay, with me so far? Now, the third one here is a little bit hard to explain, the moment. The FAA defines a moment as a force that causes or tends to cause an object to rotate. It is indicated by the product of the weight of an item multiplied by its arm. Now, the second half of that definition does make sense because the moment is the weight times the arm. Now, if that first sentence of the definition makes absolutely no sense to you, don't worry, you're not alone. I don't really understand that either. So let me try to give you a better example of what this is talking about. The idea is if you had a 100-pound medicine ball and then you put it in the co-pilot seat, you're not going to experience a whole lot of shift in your balance. However, if you took that same 100-pound medicine ball and then you put it in the absolute tail section, you are going to throw off that center of gravity by a lot. You're going to make this aircraft very tail heavy. All moment is just putting a numerical value to that phenomenon, but it's also taking into account position and the weight. So in a lot of ways, the moment's the most important part of this. And one more thing I'd like to point out to you, if you notice your weight and balance revision, this is not the original weight and balance from the factory. This is a revision. While weight and balance doesn't expire like military weight and balances do over time, every time you have a major alteration or repair, you get a weight and balance revision. So that's what this is. This aircraft obviously underwent a extensive avionics upgrade, so then they re-weight it, and these are our new numbers. This is your empty weight, your arm, and your moment. Last thing I'm going to say about the weight and balance form is this has to be present inside of the aircraft before you take flight. This is the W in your aero checklist. This has to be either physically printed off or you have to have a digital copy on you, but this has to be present in the aircraft. Verify that. Now, coming over here to our owner's manual. Hey, post-church here. I noticed whenever I was editing, I forgot to mention this manual also has to be in the aircraft prior to flight. This is the O, operational limits, of your aero checklist. Do not take off without having either a physical printout of the owner's manual or this digitally. Starting from the beginning, you can see on the very first page, it gives you specifications. We have our gross weight, 2,300 pounds. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and skip over to page, I'm using Goodreader. It's going to be page 27 on Goodreader, and if you're actually using the print off, it's going to be 4-4. So chapter 4, page 4. And this is your load arrangement table. So these are your CG arms for each station. So you have your pilot and co-pilot seat. And now keep in mind with your front seats, they're actually adjustable, so you can slide them back again and then slide them forward once you're in position to get up to the pedals. So it actually gives you that range. So that's going to be 34 to 46 inches, with 37 being right there in the middle for planning purposes. Your rear seat's going to be 73 inches. Baggage area. Now, the reason why it has these stars right here, and once again it explains it over here, it's measured to the center of the area shown. So as you can see here, this is a compartment in behind the second row of seats. You can skip the 108 because that's the divider. And then your tail section is going to be 123. Once again, it's measured to the exact center of this area. And typically you don't want to put anything beyond the tail section unless you absolutely have to. Going over to the next page, you are going to see our loading problem. Now this is where you're going to put in all the information, and it's going to give you a mathematical readout of your weight and your moment. So just to get started, if we're going to do this the analog way, which this is what this is, I'm just showing you how to use the actual manual. Even though it's a digital copy, this is exactly what the manual looks like. I'm going to go ahead and put in the information from our weight and balance page. Oh, that's the handbook. So we have 1429.81 and we have 56,987.22. Go ahead and click on here, and we're going to put in 1430 because now we're just rounding because it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So I'm going to put 1430 here for our empty weight in pounds. Now, keep in mind with the moment, so it was like 56,000. If we divide that by 1,000, it'll give us a more usable number here. And once again, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, so rounding is fine. I'm going to put in 56.99. Once again, I'd just like to remind you that these two numbers here came directly off of our weight and balance form. The only difference is I've divided this number by 1,000. Now, moving on to this next part, this one is kind of funny. You know how I told you that the datum for this aircraft starts at the firewall? Well, because the oil goes in the engine, and that's roughly what here, you will have a negative number for your moment. This, while it is nice that they went ahead and pre-filled the 15 and negative 0.2 for our weight and moment, this is talking about the oil based on 8 quarts of oil. Now, if we're being realistic, I mean, there's nothing wrong with utilizing this number, but for our purposes, I never put 8 quarts of oil into our aircraft. Most you'll see is 7. Typically, you're looking at 6. Our minimum per our SOP is 5.5. So if you really wanted to get accurate, what I do, right, is I go ahead and mark out these two numbers, like so. And the way that you do that, you click the line over here and just insert. Boom. Okay. So mark out these two numbers. And what I'm going to do is, so we know that the weight is the arm, or weight times the arm equals your moment. And then this is divided by 0.2. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and reverse math this. So negative 0.2 times 1,000 equals negative 200, as you can see here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to divide that by 15, which is our weight, equaling negative 13. So I'm just going to go ahead and come over here and type negative 13. So that negative 13 right there is our arm. Okay, so negative 13 times 15. So if 15 pounds is 8 quarts of oil, what I'll do is, so we'll do an equation here. We'll plan, so 8 quarts is 15 gallons. And if we want to go with 6 quarts, we'll just go, clear this out, 15 times 6 divided by 8 gives us 11.25 pounds. Okay, cool. So for planning purposes, if you're wanting, and you can do this with any number of quarts, you can go 5.5 if you really want to be precise. I just put 6 just to keep it kind of round. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to put 11.3 because we're rounding and we don't really need the hundredths place for pounds. So 11.3 goes there. So now what I'm going to do is arm, which is negative 13 we calculated, times 11.3, and that'll give us our moment, and then divide that by 1,000. So here we go. Negative 13 times 11.3. All right, and then divide that by 1,000. So that gives us negative 0.1, and then we round that to negative 0.1. So I'm going to go ahead and put negative 0.1. Cool. Is that making sense to everybody? Okay. Now, the next line we have here is usable fuel. We want, this sample problem is based off the empty weight, or basic empty weight, which we know already accounts for the unusable fuel. So this, with standard tanks, we know that we have 38 usable gallons of fuel. So since we cap it off, we can just go ahead and take these numbers on across over here. Now, once again, we can do the exact same thing that we did up here for the oil, where you just take the 10.9, multiply that times 1,000, divide that by 228, and that'll give you your fuel moment. But, once again, we're just capping it off. We can just go ahead and carry these numbers over. I don't know why it does that sometimes. Okay, cool. So these two match. Now this next one is talking about long-range tanks. We do not have long-range tanks equipped. So what I do, just to keep it nice and easy, I just go ahead and put a line through this one so we don't make a mistake and accidentally try to fill this one out. The next one, okay, so we have pilot and front seat passenger. So I weigh 215 pounds, and the average American adult male weighs, 210, 200? I'm just going to add these two together. So there's me, 215, plus, we'll just say 200. That gives us 415, so I'm going to put 415 right here. 415 pounds in the front seat. Now, before I start mathing this out, all of these parts here, the pilot, the rear passengers, the baggage area 1, and the baggage area 2, I'm going to get these numbers, these inches right here from this page. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and pre-fill those in over here. Once again, just to reiterate, this 37, 73, 95, and 123 came from your loading arrangements. 37, 73, 95, 123. Okay? All right, so 415 times 37. All right, and now divide that by 1,000. 15.35, so 15.4. So our rear compartment, now, we usually don't have rear passengers while we're doing training, but what we do have back here in the rear seats is our flight bags. So my flight bag is a little less than 10 pounds. Just for planning purposes, I'll say I have a 10-pound bag, and then I'll say my student has a 10-pound bag. So that gives us a total of 20 pounds in the back seat. So I'll put 20 here, and 73. 73 for our arm times 20 divided by 1,000 equals 1.46 for the moment. Well, I'll say 1.5 because we're rounding. Okay. Baggage area 1. We usually keep like some spare oil back there. We'll use like the stepping stool and the funnel and whatnot. I would just go ahead and plan on putting 10 pounds in there. Once again, just to be safe. I don't know if that stuff weighs 10 pounds. You could actually get back there and weigh it if you wanted to. This is just for planning purposes. All right, so 10 times 95 equals 950 divided by 1,000 equals 0.95, which, once again, we round that up, so that just equals 1. Boom. Okay, and then baggage area 2, typically we'll leave that empty, so you can either leave this blank, or if you actually do have stuff back there, then you can calculate that out completely. Same principle. Arm times the weight divided by 1,000 gives you your moment. All right, so once this is done, we're just going to add up all these numbers, put it here, and add up all these numbers and put it here. So 1430 plus 11.3 plus 228 for fuel plus 415, that's us, 20, that's our bags, plus 10, that's the miscellaneous items in the back, equals 2,114.3 pounds. Irritates me whenever it does that. And I'll do the same thing for the moment. 56.99 minus 0.1 plus 10.9 plus 15.4 plus 1.5 plus 1 equals 85.69, so 85.7. All right, so the first question we need to ask, is our total weight exceeding our max gross weight of 2,300 pounds? It is not, so we are good in the weight category. Our moment is 85.7. I will show you how to test to see if this actually is within our moment in our CG envelope. But before we get to that, I'm going to show you this chart down here. This chart is what's called the loading graph. I'm not going to lie to you, I don't find this loading graph to be particularly useful. Actually, it's gotten some people asking questions because, as you can see, this pilot and front passenger seat, this line only goes up to 400 pounds, which has led some students to speculate that there is a load limitation of 400 pounds in the front and the rear seats, but there is no such limitation. We know that's not a limitation, so basically they just stop this line at 400 pounds. This line, you have to conceptualize it as going on up. We can actually add that black line in if we'd like to. Let me show you here. Make these two lines match, going on up. Cool. And I'll make this black just for aesthetic purposes. Okay. Now, the way this works, once again, I don't. All this does is prove what your work up here. You may want to have it filled in for check ride. Honestly, for your planning purposes, you can just completely omit the loading graph. But the way the loading graph works is, so pilot and front passenger, we had 415 pounds with a moment of 15.4. So what we do is put in our moment line at 15.4. So it's going to be about there. Take that on up. Cool. I'll make that red just so it stands out. And then we'll make another line over here at 415. Right about there. And drag that on across. And as you can see, that is, well, it's not exact, but it's right there close to our line showing the pilot and front passenger seat. Now you can do the same thing with all the other things that are on here, like you've got your fuel line here and you got your rear passengers. Once again, I find this graph to be rather useless. However, it does give you a good visual representation of how the different station positions affect the moment. Like as you can see here, this line is much more mellow for the rear passengers, just because like for the exact same weights, look how much moment you gain. That's the loading graph. You can go through here and do every single one of these, like the fuel and your backseat passengers and your cargo baggage area 1 and baggage area 2. Once again, you don't have to. That's just completion of task. The chart that does make a difference is your CG envelope. And that is going to be on the next page. And once again, we're just going to remember these two numbers, 2114.3 and 85.7. And that is going to be, if you're using the manual, it's going to be chapter 4, page 8, or if you're using Goodreader like I am, it's going to be on page 29. So, the way this works is you have your pounds of weight, and then you have your moment down here. So, I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 lines. So, 1 line. This will be our moment. So what I'm going to do is drag this up a little bit, make sure it's running parallel with the actual lines in the graph. And I'm going to drag this over to 85.7. So each line is considered in the ones place. So that, well, 85.7 is right about there. Okay, good. And then I'm going to put in another line. Let's go ahead and make that horizontal. Here we go. Cool. And I'm going to put that at our weight, which is 2114. It's going to be right about there-ish. Once again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just kind of making sure that you are within your CG envelope. And as you can see here, our CG is well within this little shape right here. So we are in the normal category, which is good. That means that we have our weight distributed in such a way that it's not going to make us either too front heavy or too aft heavy. And that's it. That is how you calculate your weight and center of gravity utilizing the owner's manual. I personally don't do this prior to every flight because there is a much easier way to do this and much more accurate way to do this using ForeFlight. Stay tuned for the next video where I show you how to do that. In the meantime, like, subscribe, and be safe flying. Church out.